Hi, I'm Cheryl Strachan, cardiac rehab dietitian and founder of Sweet Spot Nutrition. The following video is from a cook-along event that I hosted with mostly members of my free Facebook group, which I'll link to below. We're experimenting with the idea that cardiac nutrition education would be more effective if we built it right into hands-on cooking sessions like this. A couple things to know about the video. I edited it down, so it's less than half of its original length. So there's a few little jumps, but I cut out lots of extraneous comments and work in the kitchen. And when the Zoom meeting went to other people's faces because they commented or asked questions, I edited that to replace it with food photos just to protect their privacy. So the feedback I got from participants was they really liked the food, although some in the session found the menu a bit complex for this live format. So if this is all new to you, you might want to try just one of the new things. There's a few components: a great peanut sauce, tofu baked in the oven, and an arugula salad. So if one of those things is new, maybe just try one of them. And you'll learn a lot if you watch the video as well about heart health and nutrition. And the recipes are below if you want to download them and try it. And if you like this, subscribe to my channel and hopefully you'll see more.
So we're going to start with the peanut butter pasta. And this is normally something I make in less than half an hour. It's in the cookbook, the 30-minute heart healthy cookbook, but with the frozen broccoli instead of the mushrooms that we're doing today. So if you do need a quick weeknight option, I think I've said this on Facebook before, it's really nice just to throw a whole bag of frozen broccoli in when you're cooking the pasta. Right at the end, so you don't overcook the broccoli, and then boom, you've got your vegetables and it's a cinch. But we have been buying shiitake mushrooms. They're kind of a splurge at Costco. They've been selling them, but they're beautiful and they're so it's such a nice collection of shiitake mushrooms that I thought for fun today we could do it with the shiitake mushrooms, but it does take a few minutes longer. And then the tofu takes a few minutes. That's optional. I forget the name now, but someone jumped in the Facebook group yesterday and said she makes this when she has leftover chicken or leftover pork. So
Good to know.
again,
That's
if you want to
awesome.
make it quicker and you've got some leftover pork or chicken, that's another way to do this. And it's definitely going to be less than half an hour for you. But I thought we'll do the tofu together because a lot of people don't have much experience with the tofu. So I'm going to get that started. And I'll just tilt so you can see a little better what I'm doing here. So I took the tofu out of its packaging. And usually the first thing we do when we're making tofu is press it. And I'm just going to cut it into thinner slices. So I've cut it into sort of one block into two, and then each of those into thinner slices. And that is just because what we're trying to do here is squeeze the water out of the tofu. Tofu is kind of like a sponge that's full of water. If you think of a kitchen sponge that's full of water, if you want it to absorb more water, you need to squeeze out the water that's in it. And so what we want our tofu to do is absorb sauce and get nice flavor. So that's why we spend a few minutes pressing it or squeezing out the water. And so what I did there is just wrapped it in a layer of paper towels and then a layer of kitchen towel, a clean kitchen towel. Normally I actually just do this with the kitchen towel, but I think sometimes people want to be more sanitary. You can put the paper towel, whatever you like. And then there's a few layers of towel on the bottom. So I'll always put that down so all the water kind of flows down and absorbs into there. And then we just press that for a few minutes. If you had the time and you were organized to do it in advance, you could do half an hour of pressing, but even just 5-10 minutes will get some of that water out and help it soak up the sauce better. So then once it's in the paper towel, we just put it under something. So I'm going to put it under a pan here and then put my cutting board on top just to get some weight on that. There, hopefully it doesn't come crashing down. So if you can kind of see that, what I did there, just going to let that sit for a few minutes and press while we get the sauce organized. Okay, any questions about the tofu?
Sandra here. What kind of tofu did you buy?
Oh, good
Yours look
question.
quite firm.
It's extra firm, but it's up to you. If you find one that's labeled firm, that would work just as well. Yeah.
Thank
Do you have a brand that you like?
Not really. I
No.
just whatever sort of usually at Superstore where we buy it. Occasionally we find it in Costco and then it is a better deal, but it's not in all the Costco's. So it's sort of whatever they have.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So let's make the sauce. That's usually the first thing that I do. It's so quick. And I'm going to make it here in front of the camera just so you can kind of see what I'm doing. But if you're at home or normally when I make this, I do it right on the stove. Just put the pot on the stove, turn it to medium, and start throwing the sauce ingredients in the pot. But I'll do it here just so you can kind of see what I'm doing. So I rinsed the cherry tomatoes and measured them already. So I'm just going to throw those in whole. You can cut them if you want, but they're really nice if they just kind of bubble away in the sauce. They get soft and they're nice in your pasta. So I just throw them in whole. That's kind of my shortcut for lazy, quick dinners. And then this was the thing I emailed about yesterday, and hopefully this was clear to everybody. I'm adding water, and I'm going to also add this vegetable base, which is kind of, the two of them together make something like vegetable broth. So if you have the vegetable base, you can do that plus water. Now you've got vegetable broth. But if you don't, just measure out 2/3 of a cup of vegetable broth. Or if you don't have that, you could always do it with chicken broth or chicken stock. It's all good. You know, and I do buy the reduced sodium one. That's the only thing I'll say about this. Better than bouillon stuff, which I do like, is that the reduced sodium one is about half as much. And they put that in the smallest possible writing on the label. So when you're shopping, all right, so then the rest of the sauce ingredients, I measured out my peanut butter just because that's kind of a messy one. So it's half a cup of natural peanut butter, and you know, you can use the smooth so that you don't have chunks of nut in your sauce. But if you have the chunky, that is fine too. Who doesn't like chunks of peanut, right? So whatever you have. And this is a big theme in all of my cooking, is like, just improvise, use what you have, use what you like. You don't have to do exactly what I'm doing, but hopefully it gives you some ideas. There's peanut butter. I chopped up the garlic earlier just to kind of make it easy. So we throw the garlic into the sauce as well. And then I usually add about a tablespoon of oil to the sauce. I just use the olive oil for everything. You could use something like canola oil, which is much less expensive. And when you're cooking, the benefit of the extra virgin olive oil is not as great as when you're eating it raw, but it's still a good healthy oil. So either way, let's just use this to keep things simple because we're going to use that again. And then the last ingredient in this peanut sauce is the rice vinegar, which I really like. It's got a great flavor. We use it in the salad today as well too. It's about 3 tablespoons of rice vinegar. And that lets you get a lot of nice flavor without too much sodium, or too much sodium, because there's no sodium in there. I noticed a lot of peanut sauce recipes have quite a bit of soy sauce, which is fine, but that does raise the sodium quite a bit. So for this one, we don't use tons of soy sauce, just 1.5 teaspoons of soy sauce. And this is the reduced sodium soy sauce. You know, normal soy sauce has about 1,200 milligrams of sodium per tablespoon. But when you get a reduced sodium one, you should get something about 600 milligrams of sodium per tablespoon. So if you're trying to watch your sodium, that's a nice one. It's about half. And then still, you don't want to be too heavy-handed with it, right? If it's 600 milligrams per tablespoon. So this recipe just uses half that, right? 1.5 teaspoons. So it's only going to add about 300 milligrams of sodium to the whole dish. And I'm estimating it's about 4 to 6 servings, depending on how big your servings are. So you can see that even though that soy sauce is really concentrated, lots of sodium, you don't use a lot and it's over the whole dish. It's not a big deal. Okay, so I'm going to put that on the stove on medium. I don't really stir it until it starts to warm up because that peanut butter, it's easier to stir when it's warmer. So just when you start to notice it getting warmer, you can stir it. And then when it starts to bubble, turn it right down to low and just let it simmer away while we do the rest of this. Okay.
Cheryl, I have a question.
Yes.
I think you said you could, instead of using soy sauce, you could use tahini.
Oh gosh, did I say that? I meant to say tamari.
Oh, okay. I thought that was odd substitute.
Did I type? Oh, I must have mistyped there. I'm glad you asked to clarify that. Yes. Okay. Tamari, which is
I'm glad
similar.
I didn't pull my tahini out.
You're like, tahini, that seems different. Yeah, you might substitute tahini for the peanut butter, although I've never tried that. But yeah. Okay. Good question.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
The rice vinegar I have is seasoned. Can you tell me what's the difference between seasoned and unseasoned rice vinegar?
I don't know, to tell you the truth. Does anybody know? Any of our other cooks on the line? Mine says it's seasoned and it has sugars and salt in it. So maybe that's their nice way of saying we add sugar and salt to it. So if you look at your sodium, for mine, a tablespoon of this rice vinegar is about 50 milligrams of sodium. So that might have something to do with the seasoning. They've added salt and sugar to it.
This one has 0 sodium.
And does it say that it's
and this
seasoned?
is natural.
Okay.
And it's not seasoned.
It's not seasoned. So Karen, that might be the difference then. Yeah.
the one.
So the other one that's not seasoned has no sodium. And if you look at the ingredients on the back, does it say sugar and salt or is it just the rice vinegar?
0.
No.
It says 0 for everything.
Okay. I guess, Karen, that answers our question. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So hopefully that sauce is getting going. And then we'll come back to the tofu. So we're going to roast the tofu in the oven. So that's going to be the next thing that we want to get going because that takes a little while. So there's the tofu. We're going to go back to that and just cut it up into some smaller pieces. And especially if you're not super keen on tofu, I would cut it into small bite-sized pieces, like maybe 1 centimeter or 1/2 inch at the most. Because if they're too big and they're kind of not tofu fans, people are not going to love it. So they're smaller, they kind of blend right into your dish. Okay. And this, now I do this in a container, but you could also do this in a big bowl. I'm just going to toss the tofu with some cornstarch and soy sauce and a little olive oil so that it goes in the oven and gets nice and crispy for us. So we're going to do about 1 tablespoon of olive oil, and we'll just guesstimate that. We don't have to measure. This isn't like baking where you have to be really precise with things, unless you want to be, but no big deal. A little more or a little less of the olive oil. I will measure the soy sauce though. If I'm trying to keep a lid on the sodium in the dish, I don't want to accidentally overdo the soy sauce. Okay. And then I forgot to get the cornstarch. I knew I would forget something. Luckily, my kitchen is very small. So there's the cornstarch. And I would do about 1 tablespoon, and that's just to help it crisp up on the outside. This is really optional. So this is another thing we do if we're trying to cook this for a fast weeknight meal, is just cut the tofu just like I did and throw it in without crisping it up. It's perfectly safe and fine to eat like that. But it's kind of nicer if it's crisp. So then you can just give that a shake and get your tofu nice and coated. Again, if you don't want to do this, you can just toss it in a bowl. But, you know, cornstarch gets messy. So most people fry tofu, but there's a great lady in our group, and now I think she's not on the call today. Oh, I'm blanking on her name, but she introduced me to the idea that you could cook your tofu in the oven. And so then it's hands off, it gets nice and crispy. It's not another thing to have in your frying pan. So for this, I thought we would do it because then we can cook the mushrooms at the same time in the frying pan. So there, you just throw it on the baking sheet. You don't have to use the parchment paper, but it's makes the cleanup much easier, right? And the tofu doesn't really stick to it. So there's our tofu ready to go in the oven. That parchment paper is compostable, by the way. So I try to use that when I can instead of foil, which is compostable if it's clean, or recyclable, but it's never clean, right? So we'll just set the timer for about 10 minutes there for the tofu. So then we'll just get the pasta going now. I don't like to have the pasta ready too early, right? Then it just kind of sits. So we can get the pasta going. I already filled up my pot with water, so I'll just get that turned on. So I wanted to just say a couple of things about the pasta. First of all, if you're not a huge fan of whole wheat pasta, then join me. And I also don't really like the whole wheat. It does give you a little bit more fiber, but it's not the end of the world if you go with regular pasta. And some people ask about the Catelli Smart pasta. And that I would say is kind of in between. It's a little bit better than the regular white stuff because they add fiber, but it's an isolated fiber. So we don't know if it's quite as beneficial as the whole grain, which would have the fiber plus other good stuff. But if you like this, fine. If you like the Catelli Smart, maybe even a little better, the whole wheat is better, but it's kind of gummy and it has, I think, a terrible texture. So I never cook with the pasta whole wheat. I bought some and I tried it with this sauce thinking maybe this sauce is so good we could do it, but it just, ugh. So life is too short, right? And as I was just saying, we're going to measure out pasta here. And if you want to weigh it, you can. I just usually put a bowl on the scale and zero it out and then add the pasta. If you don't have the kitchen scale, though, don't worry about it. You can also, of course, look at the package. It says 750 grams on mine, but your package might be a bigger or smaller one. But you just think, okay, our recipe is about 225 grams. So on mine, that's a third of the package. So if you want to do the estimating, do that. It's just pasta, so no big deal.
Cheryl, I'm using spaghettini. Is that all right?
That's fabulous. Any
Okay.
pasta is great. Yes.
Okay. It's just that it's smaller.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
Okay, and that beeping you hear in our kitchen is the tofu. So I'll just pull that out and give it a little stir. Okay, so with the parchment paper, it's not really critical that you turn the tofu. Sometimes without the parchment paper, it'll kind of get stuck. But this stuff looks great. You could even use it now if you wanted to, but I'll let it get a little more crisp. So this is where it gets interesting because we have the sauce going and also the pasta. And then we're going to also put the mushrooms on to cook. So I cut mine a little bit earlier, so I knew that would take me a little while. So if you're falling a little bit behind because you're cutting mushrooms, don't worry about it. You'll catch up. So I'm just heating up the pan here to cook the mushrooms. So one of the reasons I love using so many mushrooms in heart healthy cooking is because they have that same flavor that you get from meat, which is called umami. I don't know if you guys know about this. Umami is a flavor kind of like sweet or sour or salty. And it was more recently developed in Japan or identified in Japan. So that's why the name is Japanese umami. It translates roughly to deliciousness or sort of savoriness. And mushrooms as well as meat have umami. So does soy sauce and Parmesan cheese. So if you're trying to eat less meat, using those ingredients can give you that kind of earthy savoriness that you might be missing with a little bit less meat. But you can use whatever kind of mushrooms you like. The dried mushrooms are especially high in umami, and so are the shiitakes. But I know they're rather expensive. So any mushroom that you like, and cook it nice and brown, and then you'll get lots of that good umami flavor. I always like to say too, mushrooms have the same kind of fiber as oats. It's called beta glucan, as well as other kinds of fiber. And fiber is just any carbohydrate that's in plant foods that can't be digested and absorbed into our body. And fiber, some of the fiber kind of gloms onto cholesterol in your gut and helps when you go to the bathroom, out goes some cholesterol and you lower your cholesterol. And so mushrooms are like oats in that they do that. So that's a couple of reasons I love cooking with mushrooms. Also, they taste great. So I'm going to just throw those in the pan. I think if there was a real chef, they would say you got to wait till the pan is nice and sizzly. But I'm kind of more of a quick weeknight cook. I just want to get it going. And we'll leave it in there long enough. It'll get brown. So let's just toss in the mushrooms.
I've got a question. Oh, sorry, the dog's barking. For the tomatoes, they don't seem to be splitting open. Should I mush them a bit now?
No, I don't really. They'll
okay.
Soften up, but they don't
They
have to
will.
necessarily split open. Yeah.
Okay, very good.
Okay.
And you don't put any salt or oil in the pasta water before
I'm
you
so
put-
glad you asked that question. I meant to address that, Tamara, about do you salt your pasta water? So many chefs will absolutely say you must salt pasta water, but of course their priority is more taste than health and blood pressure prevention or high blood pressure prevention. So it's kind of a toss-up. It is a way of building in flavor. We like to build layers of flavor in a dish, and having that little bit of saltiness right in the noodles can make a pasta taste great. It seems like a lot of salt, but it's not too much. So it's an option. You can do it if you want. I don't normally salt my pasta because my taste buds are used to it. But I would say whatever if you find it needs a little more flavor, you can do that. I'll give you some numbers here though. Normally they say to add about a tablespoon of salt, which is 3 teaspoons, to a pot of water with about a pound of pasta. which is twice what we're using. So it's a lot of salt. Normally you hear them say it needs to taste like salt water or seawater. It's a lot of salt, but not all of it is absorbed right into the noodles. So when they look at the analysis of what's in the noodles, it's usually about 200 or so milligrams of sodium for a cup of noodles, which isn't bad, really. This dish, the way I've prepared it here, it's just under 300 milligrams per serving. And that's pretty low. I mean, my normal rule of thumb is about 500 or so per meal. So you've got some wiggle room there if you like to add a bit of salt to the pasta water. It's not the end of the world. Like I say, it'll add about 200 milligrams of sodium for every cup. And the pasta sauce should be a nice sauce by now, just kind of simmering away, softening up those tomatoes. Keep an eye on the pasta. I forgot to set a timer for the pasta. Sorry. So well, that's okay. We can always do it by taste. But I do always like to say, if you're concerned about blood sugars, if you've got either pre-diabetes or diabetes, then having your pasta not overcooked is helpful. They cook it to just say al dente, and then the carbohydrates break down more slowly in your body. Whereas when pasta starts to be overcooked, you kind of forget about it and it's on there for like 15 minutes and the pasta water starts to look really cloudy, lots of starch in there. That pasta is kind of already breaking down. And when you eat it, it'll make your blood sugars go up faster. So normally I do say, if you think of it, set a timer so you're just cooking it to al dente. And al dente is just when it's tender and cooked, but there's still a little bit of a bite. It's not super mushy yet. So I'm going to say that's done in my kitchen. So I'm going to drain the pasta, maybe taste yours and see if you're there yet. Okay. So one reason that I use a rather big pot for the sauce is just so I can add the pasta right to the sauce. You could do the other and use a small pot and add the sauce into the pasta, but this is less cleanup, right? Because right now the big pot only has had pasta. And you know what I totally forgot to do is I forgot to grab some pasta water. That was something I always like to have a little pasta water. Yeah. And half the time I do forget, and it's no big deal. Oh, Karen did it. Good job. So if you grab the pasta water, you can use that if you need to thin out your sauce. But if not, just use a little more water or broth. It's no big deal. And it's just something we keep in our back pockets in case the sauce needs to be thinned out a little bit. Okay, so my timer just went for the tofu. So I'm going to grab that tofu out. Okay, and there's our tofu. It's nice and brown and crispy. If you like tofu, that's yummy. If you're not a tofu person, this is, I think, one of the best ways to get to like it is to make it crispy. And I'm going to throw that in the pot as well with the sauce and the noodles. So just give that a good stir so you get some of that yummy sauce all over your noodles and your tofu. And hopefully your mushrooms are kind of coming along. So I'll just demo the salad, but it's so easy. If you're a little bit behind, you'll have no problem doing this when you have time. So big bowl, and I just use as much arugula as we need. I think I wrote the recipe for using the whole tub of arugula. You don't have to use it if you're just cooking for 1 or 2 people. Just use a handful or however much you think you'll need. The really nice thing about making arugula, well, there's a few nice things about using arugula for salads. One is it's so flavorful. I don't find you have to add a lot of dressing or make a fancy dressing. Arugula has this great, if you haven't ever tasted it, just have a taste. It's like a nice peppery taste. I'm sure some of you have already cooked with it, but if you haven't, so you don't have to fuss with it a lot. It comes pre-washed, which is nice, unless you buy it, farmer's market or do it in your own garden. And then I just usually cut it with scissors. The kitchen scissors I love because you don't have to get a cutting board. Somehow it just feels like it's easier. So I just cut up the arugula enough that it's bite-sized pieces. So you don't have any ginormous piece of leaf coming out of your mouth.
Cheryl.
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
Are you still cooking? Oh my God, the dog. Are you still cooking your sauce or just leaving it to just meld?
I have the sauce with the noodles and the tofu now in it on low on my stove. just so it stays warm and the tomatoes kind of continue to soften up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So the other neat thing about arugula, if you are someone who's on warfarin, which some people in our cardiac world are on warfarin, and they have to watch their vitamin K, it's not as high in vitamin K as something like spinach. So that's something to know. And the other thing is the dark leafy greens, I always like to give them a plug because we know they're great for heart health, but they're also a really important component of the mind diet, which is like the Mediterranean, but with a little bit of extra, a special emphasis on the leafy greens, the dark leafy greens and berries. And the mind diet has been shown to help with dementia and cognitive decline, reducing chance of that in people who eat that way. So sign me up, right? My dark leafy greens. So this gives you some variety. If you're kind of done with spinach and broccoli, you want something different. Arugula is great for that. Oh, and the other, I love to plug arugula because the other thing is you can make a salad, and if you don't eat it all, put it in the fridge. The next day, it's not all wilty and awful. It's not like the really baby lettuces and the delicate lettuces that are just a waste the next day. So sometimes I will make a whole tub of it into salad, and then we have it for 3 or 4 days. But today I just did a small amount, about half the tub there. And then I'm just going to add, for the whole tub in the recipe, I said 2 tablespoons of olive oil. But for this, I'll add about a tablespoon or so. Again, just to taste however you like it. And that extra virgin olive oil has polyphenols and other antioxidants, things in them that are really beneficial to your arteries when uncooked. So it's great to use that extra virgin olive oil in a salad like this. And then you can sprinkle in a little bit, just a little bit of that rice wine vinegar for extra flavor. I think for the whole tub, I said 1 tablespoon. So maybe just half a tablespoon, a teaspoon or so. You can just see how it tastes, but you can always add more. It's hard to take it away, right? So that's the base for this salad. And then usually we do some Parmesan because of course, Parmesan cheese makes everything taste great. Okay. And I have the pumpkin seeds here, but of course you can add whatever nut or seed you like to your salad, but great place to add them, right? And those nuts and seeds every day have been shown to lower risk of heart disease, help with triglycerides, which I wrote about last week, right? Lower cholesterol. And the seeds like pumpkin seeds or sunflower are always a little bit higher in protein than most nuts, peanuts being the exception. So if you're not eating a lot of meat and you need to get enough protein, that's why it's great to add something like pumpkin seeds. Plus I find they just taste great. The ones they sell at Costco are already roasted. They don't need to have a lot of like toasting or roasting to taste good. So then, that's how fast that salad can be. And often we will do it just like that to kind of get that half plate veggies more easily. But if you have hanging around in your kitchen other things, this is also really nice with chopped tomatoes or shredded carrot or whatever else you like to add to it. You can get real creative there. Fun. I don't know if anybody else is on the gallery view and you can see the different videos, but I see there's like half the people cooking away, very busy. And then half are kind of like, I'm just going to watch. And it's like, this is probably more relaxing to watch, but good job, everybody who's cooking. I can see you working hard there. I don't know on your end, but here in my kitchen, the mushrooms are brown. So I'm going to add them to the pasta and that we're going to call it ready. But before I do that, I'll just add a little bit of water. I noticed that it's thickened up quite a bit. And this is just a taste thing, but I like it a little more watery. Ellen was commenting when I did the barley risotto or the barley, what was it? Pilaf. A few weeks ago that it was more watery than you like. And I think that's something I like. The oats with lots of water in the pasta. So if it's thickened up too much for you, just add a little water, or if you have broth or stock, do that just so it's not too thick.
I have to tell you, Cheryl, that I made it again after we talked about that wateriness. Yeah. And I poured off some of the extra water, and then it got really dry in the fridge. The leftovers were super dry. So I think you're right. I think it keeps absorbing the water and it needs a little to stay moist.
Yeah. all
Yeah.
the starches do that, right? Even if you had oats and you cooked them the next day, you would need to add some milk, soy milk, cream, something to kind of, because they soak up so much of the liquid, it does tend to get dry. Yeah. Okay. So let's see here. We'll toss that in the mushrooms in. And I'm going to call that done here. I know some of you are still cooking away madly. So that we've been on the phone for like 55 minutes. But I think if you were to do this more than once, you'd get a little bit faster at it. Like I say, certainly at home, I do it less than half an hour, no problem for dinners. But although that is without the mushrooms, the mushrooms take a little extra time, but they're such a treat. So if you like, I would say this pasta is definitely better with red pepper flakes. And also salt is okay, right? So when you sit down to taste it, if you think, gee, that needs a little more salt for me, or a little more soy sauce, there's some wiggle room in this recipe. You know, my rule of thumb is about 500 milligrams of sodium per meal. And a serving of this, if we call a fifth, and you can see it's a nice big pot of pasta. I should pull it out, by the way, for the people who haven't got it done yet. So there's what it looks like with the mushrooms and the cherry tomatoes and the noodles. Like, it's a nice big pot of pasta. You could easily call that 5 servings. And when I did the calculations at 5 servings, it's under 300 milligrams of sodium. So if you felt like, oh, that needs a little more something to me, add a little more soy sauce or a pinch of salt if you like. And that will not add more than 50 or 100 milligrams of sodium. It's very different. You know, a lot of the concern about sodium in our food supply and in Canadians' diets, it comes from how much people eat at places like Tim Hortons and Subway and Boston Pizza. Like, in your own kitchen, you're probably going to put way, way, way less than that. So put some more if you need, or my husband loves to put red pepper flakes on this. Sorry, this is just my own little funny spice container full of red pepper flakes. So if you like those, they add no sodium or anything, and of course, tons of flavor and or pepper. So I usually put a little pepper in with the arugula, although it has tons of peppery taste already. And I'm going to call that done. And I always like to say too, this whole thing can be frozen. You know, some people I think are purists about texture, but I think the tofu comes out okay. So we definitely freeze this. And then, you know, we've got something you can throw in the microwave, and 5 or 10 minutes of heating in the microwave, and you've got a pasta ready to go. So if you made it the whole batch and you're only 1 or 2 people, just freeze what you don't eat if you don't want to have the leftovers.